Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Aftershock event panel. I'm Carolina. I'll be the moderator for today. And we have two great people who we will learn more about. We have Lonnie Nadler, if you want to wave. He is a storyteller from Vancouver, Canada, known for his work at Marvel Comics, such as X-Men and the Guardians of the Galaxy. He released his critically acclaimed debut graphic novel, The Dregs, in 2017, along with Zac. And his 2018 follow-up book, Come Into Me, was named one of the best 100 horror comics of all time by Pace magazine. And then in 2020, his historical fiction cosmic folk horror concoction, Black Stars Above, was longlisted for a Bram Stoker Award. Um, Lonnie is currently working on his series Undone by Blood, which I'm sure some of you know about since you are here. And it's in development with the Big Bald Head production and AMC, which is great news. And along with that, Lonnie has also worked with various publications such as Vice, HuffPost, Blood Disgusting, Seraphim Films, Panel X, Panel, Ahoy Comics, and those are just to name a few. And then we have Zac Thomas, who's also here if you want to wave. He was also born and raised in Canada, but in Prince Edward Island, known for his titles like Marvel X-Men, Yondu, Absolute Carnage, Avengers, Cable, and X-Men, Black for X Marvel Comics. And then along with his indie book film books such as Her Internal Descents, Relay, and The Replacer. And in 2019, Zac became the showrunner of the Age of X-Men universe at Marvel Comics. And his critically acclaimed miniseries, Come Into Me, like I mentioned, was called the best horror comics of 2018 by Horror DNA. And then his debut comic series, The Dregs, like I mentioned, was called The Lowbrow Brilliant by New York Magazine. And lastly, his novel Weaponized was a winner of 2016 Cryptic TV Horror Fiction Contest. So that was a lot of information that I threw out to all of you, but that's just a glimpse of what these two have been working on. And as you can tell, it's a lot of great things. So thank you, Lonnie and Zac, for being here today virtually at ITHACON. We are really excited, and yeah, we can just jump right into the questions. But yeah, like I mentioned, their bios, you can tell that they've been in a lot of different things, have had a lot of great opportunities. So if you can just talk about, compared to others in this industry, some will say that you became pretty successful quickly. How did you manage your success? And was there any valuable advice that stayed with you that you think about today, especially during this time? And kind of how does that motivate you moving forward for other future projects?
We managed it poorly. We managed success very poorly.
That's what I was going to say too. So,
It's an interesting question because I was actually, and this is what I do all the time. I defer to other people who are smarter than myself to answer questions for me. But I was watching a talk that Neil Gaiman gave, and he said when he was doing Sandman, obviously Sandman is way more successful than anything Zac and I have ever done. But the point remains, he was doing it, he was going on book tours, and it was a massive success. He sold 2 novels, and it was kind of, he was around our age and in over his head. And he said Stephen King told him, I hope you enjoy it. And Neil Gaiman said, I actually didn't stop to enjoy it. And that's one of the only regrets of my career. And I think that's something that I would also advise, because Zac and I, when we were in the thick of all the Age of X-Men show running and writing 2 or 3 other books simultaneously, it was like, this was our lives, and we would just work for 12 hours a day and then go home, and we would continue researching by like watching movies, but that still work. So I think it's important to sometimes to take a step back and just try to enjoy what you're doing and really appreciate, because this is stuff we wanted to do since we were kids, right? So just trying to give into your your 12-year-old self and be like, imagine how proud my 12-year-old self would be of my adult self doing what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah. And to even add on to that, I think like treating the things that you're working on is the most important thing, and sort of really just throwing yourself into it and enjoying the work that you're doing, because all too often when you sort of reach that like crazy ramp up speed that we reached it in like a year, you don't really take stock of things and you don't really enjoy them for what they are. And sometimes you can spread yourself too thin and not treat it as the most important thing. And I think that like that comes down to just making sure that you, like Lonnie said, you came into something with a specific intent and purpose that you dreamt of doing, and to really like take a step back, recollect yourself, and be like, this is awesome, and this is really cool and exciting, and I have to, treat it like that, and but also like, make sure that it's my priority and that that's where my head's at. Don't focus on where you want to go, focus on where you are and doing the best work that you can.
Yeah, no, that's very, very valuable. And I think that when you think about success a lot of the time and you look at someone's success, you often forget too that they might have faced some obstacles along the way. And you've talked about writing for 12 hours a day or working for that long. How did you kind of work through those challenges along the way? So maybe you've written and sent it to a publisher, but they rejected it multiple times. How do you stay motivated in that aspect? Because these stories are, I'm sure, very personal to you. So getting that rejection varies of times. How do you kind of like, do you say, oh, maybe this idea doesn't work, let's scrap it and rewrite from another perspective? Or like, how do you move forward with that?
Well, I mean, we're still getting rejections. So that it never goes away. And I think that sort of like you harden to it in a way. But I think the main thing that I could say is that when you're pitching something, you're coming to it from a specific reason or lens, or there's a fire in you that wants to tell that story. And despite how many people might tell you that there's no space for it, I would say don't give up. I would say if you believe in something truly, the sign of the people who sort of make it through to the other side are those who sort of find, by hook or by crook, they find a way to make the story that they want to make, to tell the story that they want to tell. And like our first book, The Dregs, that basically started our career and sort of kicked our career in the butt and put us on this crazy trajectory. That was rejected by pretty much every major publisher in comics except for the one that picked it up. And even the one that picked it up, we pitched it, I'm going to say about 18 months before they said yes. So we were certain it was dead. And then they sort of came to us and they were like, we believe this has a lot of merit. And, but we had been told by every other publisher, including some that we work for currently, that there was no merit in the story, that there was no place for it on the shelves. And by virtue of not listening to that and working on it, that's legitimately what carved a unique space out for Lonnie and I in the market that people told us didn't exist. And we knew it was there. It's just that we had to find someone who believed in us to get it there.
Yeah, and two things to add to that is you have to be a little foolish and a little headstrong.
Yeah.
Because you have to believe in yourself, especially when you're first starting and you have no credits and all that stuff. It's like Zac and I were incredibly ignorant when we first started. And that's why The Dregs is a good example, because the pitch pages we sent around, every publisher was right to turn it down because it was crazy. And, the pages were just kind of way too much for a pitch. We know that now, but at the same time, that's the story we wanted to tell, and eventually it became what it is today. The other thing I'll say is I think it's important to not put all your eggs in one basket, and to branch out and try a lot of different things, because I think sometimes people, it's great to be passionate about the story, and like if you have one story you want to tell, that's great. But something Zac and I did that really behooved us was, yes, we had to pitch for The Dregs, but we knew from our friends how many pitches get rejected. So we also had, I think, 2 or 3 other pitches that we were working on while we were trying to get that out. And it was like, okay, maybe The Dregs fails, and that's okay if it does, we'll get back to it, but we have these other things we're working on. And eventually those became our second and third books afterwards. So you need to just have more than one hill you're going to die on. Have many, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of those publications are now like looking at it and being like, "Ooh, I should have gotten, first dibs and not rejected it." So I'm sure they're regretting it now. But kind of like after publishing Dregs, do you recall the first time seeing your book in like in a store or a website, or even like the first time someone reached out to you, whether it was like on social media because they read one of your books, and what was that like for both of you?
So we worked together when the dregs came out at the same day job. So we would find little nooks and crannies to write in whenever we could. But like when it came to the day that it came out, I remember um, the books didn't arrive to the store that we were signing at, which is like, of course, that's going to go wrong. So Lonnie and I were carrying a box of like 200 issues of it that were like just destroying my shoulder uh, through like downtown Vancouver, both of us like on the verge of like vomiting from stress to go in. And then like, but the cool thing was like so many people that we had touched base with in Vancouver over the course of our lives showed up on that day. And there were so many people who like came and read it. And, we had journalists reaching out because the book was about the like, criticism of the opioid epidemic in Vancouver. And it was just like, CBC wanted to talk to us, which is like the Canadian broadcasting company that like, it was just very surreal, but it was, there's nothing like it because something exists in your head for 3 or 4 years. And then when people are reading it and connecting with it, it's like, it's so gratifying, but it's also extremely surreal. It sort of doesn't make sense that these people that were in your head for so long are now in other people's heads and thoughts. And yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it's so strange, 'cause especially when when you write. Zac and I had been writing for several years before this came out, and I don't think we were prepared for the experience of really our work getting out there. Of course, we'd have people read our work, but it was always people who know you. So the experience of having people who have no idea who you are and reading your work is very, very strange.
And has that shifted since you've written so many series or like books? Like, does that excitement ever change of when someone comes up to you and says like how inspirational your book was or how much they enjoyed it?
There's always dread before you release something where like you're like, this is it, this is where people are going to figure out like that the jig is up, and like this is the thing that people are not going to like. And it's interesting how that cycle sort of never exhausts itself. Like you always are in this position where you're like, this new thing that I'm releasing is the thing that people might not connect with or might not see eye to eye with or might not read. And which I think is good. I think there's a level of like kind of resetting the clock and not getting too big for your britches, and like allowing things to maybe potentially fail just to simply see what types of stories people are into. But when people find it and connect with it, it absolutely never gets old. It's, yeah, I could live off of it.
And then kind of just shifting gears a little bit, kind of why, some people are in like watching us right now. We can't see them, but they are people here. Kind of more about Aftershock. How has Aftershock played a role in both of your careers, and kind of how it's, changed drastically now since, you've been working with them?
I think we're really, Zac and I try to keep stock of how fortunate we've been in our careers, and specifically with Aftershock, because it was basically after, I don't know, Zac, how many issues of the dregs had come out. I think it was only one or two.
Yeah.
But we went to New York. Was it New York Comic Con or Emerald City Comic Con? Or anyway, one of them. And we had spoken with Mike Marks, who's the editor in chief there. And basically, after reading one issue, he was kind of like, I want to work with you guys. But it wasn't like just, oh, yeah, like send me stuff. It was, you could tell Mike was sincere, and he really saw something in us as young creators, and from the get-go invested in us in a big way, where and I don't think we appreciated it at the time, but we signed a 3-book deal with Aftershock, which means they were going to give us 3 series, a contract for 3 series out the gate, and we'd only put out 2 issues at the time. And that was like, looking back, that was a risk for them to do, but also like, we're so lucky to have had someone who had been in the industry for so long look to us and see something, and try to cultivate that. And they've been there almost since day one for our professional careers. And that's something that I just can't stress enough how important that's been to always have them to fall back to always have Mike excited and everyone else at Aftershock to look at our what we're working on and to try to keep our careers going.
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about a lot because um, when you're a comic book creator or a writer or anything like that, you're sort of freelance, right? So you're going from place to place and you're sort of like bringing your wares and displaying them to the publisher and being like, hey, do you want to work together? And a lot of people will meet you with like tempered enthusiasm at the beginning of that and then kind of like fall away. And it's very exciting to have that preliminary conversation with you, but then they don't really go any further than that. So what's been fascinating is like paying attention to the people who are excited about you and leaning into those relationships, because those are the people that want to help your career in the long run. And Aftershock made it very clear to us in the beginning that they saw value in us entering the comic book creator space and staying there. And I think a lot of the times you can get caught up in the politics of publishing where like you're not exactly there to publish a book, you're more there to fulfill a publishing goal of the publisher, or they might not actually believe in you so much as a creator. But that has not been true of Aftershock in a very big way. And in fact, like, as Lonnie can attest, I think we've sent them many things where we're like, they'll never publish this, they'll never be into this. And they've always met us with enthusiasm and excitement and the like, okay, cool, this might not be perfectly right, but let's build it. Let's figure out a way to make it right. And that's like, I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Yeah, and just as a quick example, it's like the next thing I'm working on with Aftershock, I just sent them a 30-page document that was like a world building experience. And I literally don't think any other publisher would even look at that or read it. And, Mike and Christina over there read it and gave me very helpful notes on it. And were not just that, but they were excited about it. And if that's the kind of writer I am, to have my publisher and editors invest in me that way is like, it's so important to me as a creator.
And then kind of following up to what Lonnie just said, Zac, do you have any examples in which, Aftershock has helped differ from other publishers that you've worked with in the past? And then Lonnie too, if you want to jump into to give another example if you have.
So I just released a graphic novel called Lonely Receiver, and it's like a weird body horror, sexual romance thriller that absolutely does not have any sort of comparable titles in the market. And I basically pitched them like I wanted to make like a David Cronenberg romance book, and they were extremely excited. And that's the sort of thing that like gives publishers hives generally. Like they hear these things and they're like, oh, like, and the fact that it didn't have a specific comparable title, or the fact that it didn't have a specific like audience there waiting for something like that, was exciting to them. And I feel like oftentimes what you hear from other publishers is like, well, we don't know who would buy this, so we don't know what to do with it. And I think that a lot of times we will say, hey, similar to Undone by Blood, like Westerns were a big thing in comics for a really long time. They don't really exist broadly in the space right now. We want to do something that brings that back. And normally publishers would be like, oh, we don't want to take the first chance on something like that, because what if it fails? And then we got to publish a Western comic and it was the most successful thing that we've ever done. And it was because Aftershock saw an opportunity and took a risk. And it is a risk when there's nothing else out there like the book that you're putting out into the world. But they were so down to take that leap.
Yeah, I think one other thing that distinguishes them is just adding to, maybe I'm not saying anything new, but their just desire to invest in us. And they're the only publisher, maybe not the only, but the only publisher that has consistently come to me with offers, or what are you working on? What would you like to do next? We want to work with you. And it's been 4 years of that now. And most publishers are a bit more predatory in that they see someone who's sort of a rising star or someone who's hot on the market, and they'll go to them and want to work with them for that moment, to fulfill a need, like Zac said. But I never got that feeling with Aftershock from them. It was really just a sense of, we see something in these guys, and whether or not they're going to be superstars, we're going to try to help them on that path.
And I know you guys kind of touched upon like the Undone by Blood series being like this Western genre. Is there any other genre that you want to explore and write about that, sometimes there are people who like publications are saying like, they might not be interested in a specific genre. Like Zach, you were talking about that independent book you pitched to Aftershock. Are there other ideas that you have that you want to work on, whether it's like combining a bunch of different genres that people are not used to, and like how do you approach that of like, well, you don't really know, there's no large audience, or you don't even know if there's an audience in that aspect too. How do you work on that, and like what are other ideas of genre you are interested in approaching?
I think from the get-go, Lonnie and I sort of set out to be like more journeyman genre people that were able to like go between things, because like the Dregs is like a straight up noir but has horror elements, and like there's a little tinge of sci-fi in it too, where the world is not quite reality. And I think that like comics as a medium excel when they embrace all kinds of different genres. They're the one thing that, the budget doesn't go up if you want to blend sci-fi with crime or whatever. And I think there's elements of it that, because it's such a visual medium, you want to basically give people worlds that are a little bit larger than life, and to fill them with interesting visuals that also tell a story in and of themselves. So to answer your question, I can't even pick any book I've ever worked on that would comfortably fit into one genre. And I think that's by design. You obviously want to pick certain things that like are informing the narrative, and you go, okay, this is a noir and this is going to have all of these elements, but throughout that we can sprinkle these things and really play and have an interesting sort of like juxtaposition between what would typically be a normal mystery story and what you can do in comics, which is you can blend all these different stuff. And I think that like there's just so many opportunities now with people being so fluent in genre. Like there's so many things that come out now that are like giant tentpole films that blend elements of like classic adventure films and sci-fi, and superhero movies are a constant blend of genre stuff. And not that I think those are like the high watermark of entertainment, but I think there's a lot to learn about the fact that people are now consuming culture that blends genre and plays with conventions so much that you can take that information and then relay it back to readers in really new and fascinating ways.
Yeah. Can I make a quick follow-up? I think that's great. And we do have to do a shout out to Mike Clark of the Aftershock Army. Good to have you on board, Mike. I'm very curious. What you said is very interesting. Is that expanding comics? People who like it, like the relevance and ability to shift between genres? Or do you think that it's stuck like superheroes and then all others?
It's definitely stuck. I think I mean like
I was hoping you wouldn't say that. Oh no.
Maybe that's too pessimistic. I do believe there's opportunities with comics and they're growing, but I do think that there's a strong undercurrent of superhero books that sort of have a stranglehold on this industry, and people like Lonnie and I are sort of committing ourselves to doing the work to untangling those things and creating more adult comic books that are not talking down to their readers, that are treating readers like interesting people who consume literature and want to be challenged by the material. And I think that there's a lot of comics that are doing that right now, but I still think they're the minority.
And I'll just to add to that, superhero comics by nature are stuck. The characters are incapable of changing by the very genre, and that's fine, but that's what superhero comics are. And not that we have anything against them, because Zach and I have written them, but in terms of what we're looking to do with our create our own stuff, it's a very different space, and I think comics as a medium has embraced this kind of stuff, going back to the dawn of the medium. It's kind of embraced that, even with like Jodorowsky and Mobius doing the ink out. Like that's not really, it doesn't fit into a genre, and you couldn't have made that into a film because it's so grand and full of ideas. And even like Metabarons from Jodorowsky and Jimenez and that kind of stuff, and a lot of those Euro artwork, the graphic novels and stuff, sort of do this genre crossing that we're continuing to do now. And it's not that Zac and I think we're sort of, trailblazers in this sense. It's just we look at that stuff and see it as something unique to the medium and something that we want to continue to push, as opposed to whatever is the status quo. And wherever the market is stagnating is where we want to go the other way and try to do something different.
Yeah, go ahead, Ed. You unmuted. Oh,
yeah. I was gonna say, I don't know if you read that Aftershock book that just came out, Patron, which is like a twisting of that superhero, specifically like the Superman legend. That kind of speaks about how superhero comics have trouble with real change, right? It's all incremental, it snaps back. And, the mediums you guys do really don't.
I think even superhero, I haven't read it, so I can't fully comment, but even superhero books that are metatextual and try to address that often end up going into the same pitfalls as ones that don't. And I say this not to, to say anything is bad. It's just Zac and I have experience in that. And a lot of the X-Men stuff we wrote, where we tried to push characters to new places, the mandate at the end of the day is you have to put the toys back in the toy box where you found them. And that's just the way superhero comics are.
Yeah, it's all about making sure that there's various entry points, or at least that's the thinking behind it. But I think a lot of the time, that desire for safety and let's put it this way, superhero comics are like the McDonald's of the comic book industry. It's a comfortable food. The menu is consistent and is never going to really change that much. There might be fun things like the McRib on the menu, but it will be gone in 6 months because they don't want to screw with people who like their Big Macs. And I think that's the sort of thing that people don't always understand, is like that's the mass media machine, and it has to be comfortable, it has to be approachable, because that's what it's been for 80 years. And so you have opportunities once you do that kind of stuff to bring people from that readership over, and you're like, hey, do you want a really weird metatextual Western that comments on America's legacy with the cowboy? They're like, come on by.
I think that's like a good segue, Zac, to speak more about your Undone by Blood. And more specifically, I know you both released your second volume, The Other Side of Eden #2. Can you speak about that, kind of what that process was like? I know you mentioned you have a 3-book contract, so kind of what was that process like after the first one? And kind of, was there anything different approaching this book?
Well, comics is very... the state of the market right now is that most publishers only run series that are 5 issues, 6 issues at most. Some publishers take risks on longer series, but generally for that to happen, they have to know there's an audience and they have to be successful enough and sell enough copies. So Zac and I, we've wanted to do longer series, I've never got the opportunity, and Undone by Blood was the first time we've gotten to go past the 5-issue mark, largely because of the television adaptation option, sort of boosting the eyes on the series. And so we were pretty intimidated by the fact that we were getting to tell a new story, and we knew the story because we were so used to doing 5 issues and being out and done. It was like, well, our story's done. Like, how do we continue this? What are we supposed to do? And so Zac and I kind of struggled for a bit, and eventually came to the realization that we could sort of borrow this TV model of the like anthology format, in terms of okay, so here's, True Detective, for example, where it's like, okay, you have 8 episodes and then it's done. The next season, still called True Detective, but an entirely different show. And so we wanted to bring that model to Undone by Blood, but still keep some threads and strings from the first arc. So that's why Solomon, the cowboy, and it became our through line into the second arc. And then, yeah, we just wanted to, our themes of exploring the myth of the West and the cowboy are, we kind of even did those, expressed those as much as we could in that first arc. So it was like, how can we push this and explore something new? And the means to do that for us was to look at a different time period and how that was affected by the myth of the West when it was still like not quite dead.
Yeah, and to basically find a way to like use the core concept as like a prism that you can kind of explore these themes in so many different directions and enrich the world. I think like there's a precedent with Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips's like criminal titles where they basically like each arc is about a criminal, but as the story goes on and goes forward, you start to see that there's like little things that are connecting all of these disparate narratives together. And I think like there are things like that in the second arc of Undone by Blood where for people who've read the first one, they're going to see those connections. But for someone who doesn't have that knowledge, they won't be taken out of it by being like, what does this thing mean? But then if they read the second one and go back and read the first one, that will also enhance their experience based on it. So we're trying to create this thing that I think comics doesn't have, which is multiple entry points to the same world. I think comics get lost in the churn, and then like you look at an issue and it's number 31 and you're like, I don't know if I can start with the 31st chapter of this thing. But with this model, you get to reset the clock every year and basically allow people to come in, catch up. No one feels alienated. No one feels like they can't participate. And I think that gatekeeping is a huge problem in comics. It's a thing that people don't know how to enter into stories. They don't know how to walk into a store and ask for something new. And we're trying really hard as like the new generation of creator to rethink about these things and try and think about it from a perspective of like, like Lonnie was saying, people watch True Detective or Fargo and they have that knowledge. So when you tell a comic book store, tell them it's like Fargo, tell them it's like True Detective, that can help them put something in someone's hands that they maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Jeez. Well, that's fantastic, fellas. And, speaking of resetting, I think we've got to reset our panel room, but we appreciate all the great work you're doing. Love the visionary planning and also that notion of trying to make smart ideas and the ways that bringing in new fans. So thank you. We enjoy your stuff so much. Carolina, any last words?
No, yeah, just thank you to both of you for being here today. I don't know if you have anything you want to plug in. I know I mentioned your new Undone by Blood series that just came out. Is there anything you're in the works right now or that you plan on releasing in the future? I don't know if you want to give a glimpse of anything.
Oh yeah, and you know what? We'll definitely put some future works in our summary of this panel. So, fellas, this has been great, though. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care of Canada for us.
Will do. There's one question from Mike Clark I just wanted to answer about how many Undone by Blood stories do we have, and I think the answer is Zach and I probably dozens. It's just a matter of whether or not we get to tell them and the book is successful enough.
I hope so. I'm ready to buy them. I got my wallet out for you guys.
Excellent.
Thank
you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone coming to ITHACON, and we got a lot of great shows coming up. We'll see you soon.